Politicians and celebrities make deals behind closed doors, promises broken, and their income soars. Hidden agendas run the grand parade. In the circus, choose a masquerade. Believe me, I wouldn't lie. I've been given money, power, and fame to keep you in line.
Welcome to the show, everyone. If you've ever dealt with anxiety, panic attacks, or just felt like your mind and body were working against you, then today's episode is for you. We have Dr. Nicole Cain, a licensed naturopathic doctor with a master's in clinical psychology. She is a trailblazer in integrative mental health, and she blends natural medicine, psychology, and neuroscience to help people heal anxiety at the root. She's also the author of Panic Proof, a must-read for anyone looking to heal their anxiety for good. So let's get into it with Dr. Nicole Cain. Thank you so much for being with us.
Delighted to be here.
So could you give us like a brief bio and share with us why you got interested specifically with anxiety and panic?
I got into anxiety and panic because I wanted to prove to myself that we could actually heal anxiety and panic. The messaging that I'd heard my entire life, and it turns out I wasn't the only one that had heard this, is that anxiety is a part of the normal human experience and you just kind of have to live with it. And I'm watching all of these incredible transformations taking place in people's health. Their energy is better, their relationships are better. Someone can fall off of a bicycle, scrape their knee, and the body will heal that. Somebody can get terrible migraines or a concussion, and the body can heal that. And it didn't make sense to me that that wasn't the story with anxiety, that anxiety is kind of a life sentence. So I was on a mission to prove that wrong. And it turns out that you can actually heal from anxiety. Panic is there for a reason. And so the book is summarizing exactly what the research says and how people can heal themselves.
So tell us what anxiety feels like. What is it? What's the difference between anxiety and panic, and what does it feel like?
It feels so differently for so many people, which is part of the problem with treating anxiety. Is one of the biggest myths is that people don't identify as anxious. They may identify as, I feel really angry and really frustrated and irritable and annoyed and impatient, or I just get a stomach upset every time that I have to go to work in the morning. I get the Sunday scaries. But they don't know that it may be due to anxiety. In fact, when people go to the hospital, one of the number one reasons we see people going to the hospital is that they're afraid that they're having a heart attack. They feel that pressure on their chest. They feel those symptoms, maybe even the radiation up to the jaw. And it turns out that 80% of those visits are people who are having a panic attack. And so the first step is to identify what is anxiety. And I think in order to identify what is anxiety and what is panic is we have to start with what's the difference between fear and anxiety. And so fear is a very natural biological response that all living mammals have. Is if a tiger is coming, those that are able to experience fear will more likely be able to escape or fight the tiger as opposed to becoming lunch. Versus those that don't have a fear response may not be able to survive and then have kids who are able to survive because they didn't know to get away from the tiger, right? So fear is a natural biological response that affects our entire body, mind, and spirit, head to toe, in context of actual danger. But here's the thing with that, is that our brain isn't concerned about our well-being, it's concerned about our safety. And so when we go through things in our lives, if the brain decides that this could be threatening or dangerous, it's going to memorize that. And then in our day-to-day existence, it's going to be referring to what it's learned and memorized as it scans what's going on to decide, are we in danger or are we not in danger? And so here's where anxiety enters the picture. If somebody has gone through a lot of stressors, or maybe they inherited a gut microbiome from ancestors that went through a lot of stressors, if the factors were such that the body was very, very hypervigilant or really acutely attuned to danger, it may overreact and make us feel anxious, even when there's nothing going on. It's like, when in doubt, we're going to make you feel fearful. So, anxiety are those feelings of fear out of the context of actual danger. And so then the second part of the question that you asked is, well, what is anxiety and panic and how do they feel? I like to think of it as a spectrum where, in if we look at a stoplight, if you will, is the green light is when your nervous system is calm, it's relaxed, it's creative, you feel good in your body, you are able to do all the things you want to do and then go to sleep when you want to sleep. That's the green light zone. But then we get a little bit activated, and I call this kind of the pay attention zone. And this pay attention zone is the moment between when we're going from green into yellow. Yellow is where we're getting a little bit of autonomic arousal. And autonomic arousal is a term that we use in science to describe what that process is the body uses to help us be protected from danger. So it can look different, and there's 9 types of anxiety, and they all have composites of different symptoms. But examples, and we could totally dive in more as we go, but examples may be your heart beats faster because you have to run from the tiger. You have to have that energy of your heart to send the blood to all the muscles, the runaway muscles. Your body temperature may rise because your metabolic rate goes up to give you energy to fight the tiger. You might find that your breathing goes faster. So some people may hyperventilate when they're anxious. And as the blood supply is diverted to all those runaway or fight muscles, it gets diverted away from maybe less relevant survival parts of the body, like your face. And so some people, they feel numbness or tingling in their face. And so when it comes to the way that anxiety feels, is we have the green light, you feel calm. We have the yellow light when we're getting a little bit activated, which looks different for each of us. And then the crisis zone, or sheer panic, or sheer rage, or even dissociation, is that red light, which is everybody's unique flavor of crisis. So that's kind of the intro to what is panic, anxiety, and fear.
Okay, so I assumed I didn't have any panic or anxiety. And then you explained it, and I'm like, oh, I think I do
Yes.
sometimes. Okay, so I was wrong. I thought this was something that just happened, but I didn't realize that like anger and like frustration and all that stuff could be panic. I always thought it was like, I can't move, I'm jittery, that type of thing, or I don't want to do it, I feel uncomfortable. Like I thought that was the panic
Yeah.
anxiety. But okay, so it's a spectrum of how you react. Okay. That's
Yeah,
good to
which
know.
is so validating, right? It's like, oh, this is a normal human experience. This is my body going into, and remember, it's fight, flight, freeze, thought, fawn, fracture. So that fight part, we often ignore that. We're like, oh, you're just angry or you're just irritable. No, this is your body producing a activated response to try to protect you.
Okay. All right. That's good.
Yeah.
So what does fawn look like? Those are the people who just have like the heart palpitations and like they just kind of sit there and they don't want to move. That would be the fawn.
Ooh, you're asking such good questions. And this is one of the most common questions I get. So let's unpack them all a little bit. And you're asking about fawn, which not a lot of people know about. So you're already like miles ahead of a lot of people's
Okay.
education on this. So this is so good. So it's fight, flight, freeze. And fight, we all know, is when we want to fight back. So you may punch, you may, like kids, they're like hitting and biting and screaming when they're angry. And then flight is we run. It's like a deer. When a deer sees a predator, they'll run. They'll just like dive into the forest. I saw a deer the other day. I was with my little dog. The deer froze. So that's the freeze. So we have fight, flight, freeze. oftentimes the body will freeze first while it's scanning the environment to make a really rapid choice of, oh, can I run away? Can I fight? Is this actual danger? Let's get the data first. Can I be invisible? Maybe if I hold really still, they won't see me. That tiger will move on, right? And then there's fawn. Fawn is a behavior that people will use to appease the dangerous oppressor. And so this may look like if you grew up in a household where you have a parent that struggles with rage.
Mm.
And if they're rageful and then they may be mean or harmful or scary or dangerous, some people learn that if they appease them, maybe you make them food or you give them a shoulder massage or you compliment them or you put on performances and make them laugh. It's trying to protect yourself by making them like you or approve of you or not be angry and directed their anger at you. So that's a fawn response. The last two are flop and fracture. Flop I see really commonly in menopausal and perimenopausal women, where it's like, I have nothing in me. I feel like my adrenals are burned out. I feel exhausted. I feel dissociated. I'm not in my body. I'm not present. I just feel like giving up. And when we measure blood pressure, we see in a flop that the blood pressure goes down, the heart rate goes down. We see this as an example in sheep. When sheep will get stuck to something, they'll get their foot stuck or get stuck on a fence. Sheep go into a flop. And so they'll just be like, I guess we're dead now. And so the shepherd has to be like, no, sheep, like you're not dead. So they'll have to unhook them from the fence and then force them to walk. And then finally the sheep's like, oh, okay, I guess we're not dead yet. And then they're fine. The last one is fracture. And this one is really cutting edge because we used to think about people as one sort of self or one entity. In dialectical behavioral therapy, they say you have your wise mind. And then we started seeing more research into internal family systems or parts. Have you seen, for example, the movies Inside Out?
No.
I only saw the first one. I've heard the second one's really good. So for those who may have seen it, I think it's like a cartoon-based Pixar film, which I think is now owned by Disney. But it's a really great portrayal about how we have different parts of ourselves. So maybe part of you, so you have a conflict with a friend, and maybe part of you can see their side, but then there's this other part of you that's just hurt or angry. And so sometimes we can feel at war with ourselves. And so a fracture is when we have those parts and they're completely separated. And on one extreme end of the fracture, we see more like dissociative identity disorders, or maybe you've heard of multiple personality disorders. And then on the other end of the spectrum is where I feel like I may just kind of zone out a little bit or feel divided. And so when we go through a lot of stress and trauma, some people will get really activated and it's just like my angry self takes over and I just get blackout angry. And then when I come back into my present self, I'm like, what the heck was that? That's an example of a fracture.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So this is a lot more deeper than I thought just panicking anxiety would be. Okay. So,
Yeah.
so how can you tell if your anxiety is like a physical cause, an emotional cause, or some sort of like trauma that we might have had?
A great way to start with figuring out what is this is I love the way that you worded that question, is because this goes into the presupposition, it goes into the assumption that I'm having these symptoms because my body is trying to communicate with me, which I really admire that you're having that perspective because so much of the language around symptoms is that they're a problem. Our symptoms are problems to be solved. And when we look at a symptom as a problem, that will direct the treatment towards symptom relief, but not necessarily looking at the symptom as the solution for us to get to the deeper meaning of it. So here's kind of a practical example is if somebody has do you have any pets or kids
Yeah,
or anything like that?
both.
Yeah. You can, okay, so kids are a really, really obvious example. So when a baby cries, the baby's not crying probably most likely for kicks and giggles. The baby's crying because there's something that's wrong. Either baby's hungry or hot or tummy hurts or needs a diaper change. And so if we just look at the crying as the problem, you could stop the experience of crying by silencing the baby, maybe taping the baby's mouth or something horrible, which don't do that. Or a good loving parent would do is say, "Oh, baby's upset. I see this indicator. What might be causing that?" So the way that we enter this conversation is exactly the way that you said it, is we want to look at anxiety as our body's way of communicating. So then what you are asking, now we can get to that place, is, well, what is the root cause? How do we find out what it is? Why do I feel angry? Why am I dissociating? Why am I panicking? Why do I go to the doctor and feel like I'm having a heart attack? Okay, now I know that it's information, but what do I do with that information? It's kind of like having to be the Sherlock Holmes of your own symptoms. And so in the book, I've written out a lot of tangible ways for you to do that. And we'll get into some today, but it's going to feel like a flyover. It's kind of like, can you tell me all there is to know about Bali in 2 sentences? And it's like, there's too much to say. So, how do we figure out the root cause? The root cause can occur primarily on three different domains. One is social and environmental, and so you and I can get into what's happening with society and the world and politics and all that stuff. The second is emotional and our experiences, our parenting, our culture, our religion, what's happening in our psychology. And then the third domain is biological. And so we can have one, two, or three, or even a mix of these factors that set the stage for anxiety. So, the first step that I often like to have my clients take is to create a timeline. And so you could get a piece of paper and you draw a long line and you do landscape wise, you do horizontal. And then you start by writing out major life events like, okay, I was born. We moved to a new house at this age. I got chicken pox at this age. My parents got a divorce at this age. I had my first kiss at this age. I got bullied in high school. I won a gymnastics competition. Whatever major life events occurred, is that you write all of those down. And then the next thing is we're going to start to flush those out. So if something was a predisposing factor for anxiety, it will require that your body adapts or your mind adapts. And so a practical metaphor for this is, let's say that you grew up in a household, we'll stay with the example of the angry parent, and you adapt to that by putting on a metaphorical winter coat. It's like you live in the north in the winter. And so you will adapt either behaviors to fawn, or maybe you become really attuned to behaviors or moods or facial expressions. That coat will change the way that you see yourself, others, in the world. And that gets memorized, that stays with you. So then let's say you move to Southern California in the summer, and that coat that you adapted, that you wore, is no longer helpful. In fact, that can cause you problems. And so you find that when your friends or your partner or somebody moves their face in a particular way that reminds your brain of the past, suddenly you may feel anxious, right? So, what we want to do is, after you've done your timeline, is then you want to start to write down events that may have changed the way that you had to do habits, or the way that you had to cope, or behaviors, or the way that you saw yourself. And we start to reverse engineer that. So the timeline is number one. And then the next one before I stop here is then you want to do just the basic medical piece, is because our body is always trying to keep us in a healthy state of balance, but sometimes the body goes out of balance. So every single year, your doctor should be doing blood work to check your thyroid, to check your liver and your kidneys and your red blood cells. And any menstruating human should always have their iron and their ferritin checked, because you're losing iron in blood. And if you don't have iron in blood, then that's going to cause not only panic and anxiety, but all sorts of symptoms head to toe. So that's the biological domain. So you have your history in the psychology, you have the biological domain, and then there's a whole can of worms in terms of trauma, society, devices, and all of that.
Could you did you already go through the 9 types of anxiety?
Let's go through those,
Yeah.
because I think that will kind of flesh out
Yeah.
the root causes and what possible root causes that might be. So, the 9 types of anxiety. Why do we care if there are 9 types of anxiety? It allows us specificity. So, a question for you is, so you're a mom,
Yeah.
you have a kid. Okay. When your kid was little, before they had their words, were you kind of able to tell, like, oh, this is, they're hungry right now, or oh, this is a cry? Like, how did you know?
I don't know, just maybe it's the tone, maybe it's just
Hmm.
I don't know, maybe pitch, I don't know.
Pitch? Yeah, but you were able to tell, right? And so then what you would do to relieve your baby's suffering is very specific. So if the baby has that tone or that pitch where they're in pain, you're not going to just feed them and hope for the best. We're going to treat that cause. So the way we generally have gone about treating anxiety, autonomic arousal, all of that spectrum is kind of a bucket diagnosis of, well, let's give them an antidepressant like Zoloft or Lexapro or Prozac. And if it's really bad, maybe we'll add on a benzodiazepine like Xanax or Valium or Klonopin. And if you're lucky, your insurance may also cover talk therapy. So you go and you talk about your anxiety. And that's kind of the best that we had. And if you had a really good doctor, they may do basic blood work and know that, oh, an overactive thyroid can cause anxiety. But they've often distilled that out, as the practitioners treating mental health and anxiety are really heavy on pharmaceuticals and talk therapy, if anything. So the gift of the 9 types of anxiety is it allows us to be a lot less general and a lot more specific. So here are the 9 types of anxiety, and here are some of the root causes for each. So the first one is thought anxiety. I actually, before this conversation, I just got off of a call with someone who has really severe thought anxiety. She has OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and it always starts with thoughts, thoughts, thoughts. And so with thought anxiety, you might find that your thoughts are racing, that they're intrusive, that you get brain fog, that your mind goes blank. It starts in the thoughts. So, if the anxiety is in the thoughts, using talk therapy treatments may be helpful. It could be helpful for you. But let's say that you are experiencing the second type, and it's chest anxiety, and your heart pounds and you feel like you can't get enough oxygen and you feel really dizzy and you feel like an elephant's on your chest. It's in the chest, the heart, the lungs area. You could talk to yourself till the cows come home, and your heart's like, don't care, tiger's here, we're going to beat, right? And so a doctor who's a little bit more attuned may say, well, why is it showing up in the chest? Maybe we'll give a beta blocker like propranolol and slow down the heart rate so people feel less anxious, right? So it allows a conventional doctor to be a little bit more specific. We can do better. And so while you may try propranolol, we're going to do deep root cause exploration. Then we've got anxiety. We know that there's so much with the gut brain axis, the vagus nerve, your gut microbiome. Recent research has shown that the gut microbiome, the oral microbiome, and the brain microbiome are in constant communication with each other. And so if one or any of these is out of balance, it can affect everybody else. So gut anxiety may give you data that, oh, there's something going on with my gut, And so instead of talking about it or taking an antidepressant or taking a benzo, you can do gut testing and you can do gut healing work. And then we have nervous system anxiety, which shows up in your muscles and your bones. My husband, the more stressed he gets, the higher his shoulders rise. And so he's like walking around, and I'm like, "Are you stressed?" And he's like, "Oh, yes." So it's nervous system anxiety. And then we have endocrine anxiety, and these are root causes involved in your hormones. And so that could be sex hormones like testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, thyroid, cortisol. The if for example somebody has, and I write about Charlotte in my book, if somebody has panic and anxiety, and it's caused by hyperthyroidism. The thyroid gland at the base of the neck is going rogue and sending out all this thyroid hormone, putting us into autonomic arousal. You could talk about it. You could take antidepressants all day, and it's not going to work because you're not treating the cause. So that's endocrine anxiety. Just a couple more. And then we have immune system anxiety. And so I'm curious, do you ever get seasonal allergies like itchy eyes, watery eyes?
I don't get that. I don't get seasonal. I do have histamine intolerance, but that seems to be
Yes.
like with the cycle.
Oh, that's super profound. And actually, you just volleyed me up perfectly into the number one chemical that we see in seasonal allergies is histamine. And what people often don't realize about histamine is it can be as activating as adrenaline. So when we get spikes of histamine, it can cause us to panic. uh, Autoimmune disease, Hashimoto's thyroid, Crohn's disease. We see this in lupus, especially in women, where autoimmunity can predispose us for anxiety. And so we want to treat the autoimmunity. So we're actually healing anxiety by treating the immune system. So it feels like, wow, that's a totally different system. But it's because the problem isn't the anxiety. Anxiety is just like, hey, pay attention. So immune system anxiety. And then the last are depression anxiety, which is just depression mixed with fear. And then we have anger anxiety, which is that fight part of fight, flight, freeze. And then trauma anxiety. And really, truly, trauma is the umbrella that oversees everything. Is trauma is anything that changes the way you see yourself, others, in the world. We have to adapt to it. That's the putting on and taking off of coats. But I've separated it out because if somebody goes through a major trauma, car accident, climate catastrophe, something like that, and the main thing for them is they're having nightmares, intrusive thoughts, avoidance, if everything is stemming from that, then you really want to focus on treating that first. And I like to recommend, especially EMDR and somatic based treatments for that. So I think we got through all the 9 types there.
Okay, good. I see a few of those. Like I sometimes get the shoulder one.
Mhm.
And then, of course, with the histamines. And since that's tied with hormonal, I think that's like the immune and the histamines are like the same for me.
Yeah, yeah, it's like a Venn diagram, right? Where you have these like pieces of the puzzle. I think of it like if somebody crashes their car and they go to a tire specialist, they go to Discount Tires, and they're like, "Oh, well, we can fix this. We'll just put on new tires." And that's like going to a psychiatrist who's like, "Oh, you're having panic attacks. I'll just give you an antidepressant." And then you're like, well, I'm still not better. So you take off the tires, put on new ones, and you go try something else. You go to a spark plug specialist, and they're like, oh, it's not the tires. Those flattened tires are fine. I know it's spark plugs. That's like then going to just an endocrinologist who's like, I'll just treat your hormones, when it could be both, right? So a lot of people, so if you're listening to this conversation and you're like, well, I've tried everything, it may be that it's different parts of the Venn diagram, but that they are all kind of feeding into each other. And so I kind of walk you through how to deal with that in the book in more detail.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I found that's helpful for me, because I used to get really cranky before my period because my histamine spike before my period. I would take an antihistamine, but then I found out some of them can cause dementia. So now, like, there's
Mhm.
other types of antihistamines that they say are safer. Who knows? We'll find out in 20 years. But so I take those or supplements that lower histamines, that do the antihistamine diet right before the period. And that seems to smooth things out to where like maybe my husband can't tell I'm about to get my period, which is always nice.
Yeah. I'd love to zero in on histamine a little bit more with you because I feel like this is really common in women and not a
Yes.
lot of women have made that connection with hormones and histamine. Is that all right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so when we think about histamine, so let's say that somebody's like, okay, I took the histamine quiz in the book. I really resonate with high histamine. I think I have immune system anxiety and I know it's jacking with my hormones because it's every time with my cycle. Here's the next question that you want to ask is why am I struggling with high histamine? And there's three possible ways. So I have this mug here, right? So think about this as like your body. It's a catacorn mug. And so you have histamine containing things that come into the body. And so this could be things that we eat that produce histamine. These could be drinks. This could be even environmental toxins that we're bringing into the body that are histaminergic. So that's the first is what's entering our body that may be histamine inducing. And then the second is what's in my body that's histamine producing. We have gut microbiome that can protect us from histamine, that can also predispose us to histamine. Some bugs produce histamine. So that's what's going on in the body. And then the third is if I was to drill holes in the bottom of this cup, you would see the histamine draining out. And so if I'm finding that I'm overloaded with histamine, is it that I have too much coming in? Is it that my body itself is producing it? Or is there an issue with my detoxing of histamine? And for many people, especially around their cycles, is there's a lot more stress on the detox pathways. And so it isn't as efficient. And so then we get more and more histamine buildup. So there are 3 histamine detox pathways. One is methylation. And methylation is where we add with, and we can often do this with supplements, we add a methyl group to help the body through the process of breaking histamine and breaking things down and removing it. The second is acetylation, which is liver phase 2 detox. So we can support that with N-acetylcysteine, supplements, calcium D-glucarate, eating your broccolis and cabbages and brassicas. And then the third is DAO, which is an enzyme that helps break down histamine producing food in the gut. So now we can start doing experiments with, well, if I take DAO when I eat, am I building up less histamine? Or if I do an environmental detox and I stop or remove the histamine going in, do I feel better? Or if I support methylation, do I find that my periods are better? So that's kind of like a quick and dirty of histamine.
Yes, I have all of those supplements you mentioned. I take
Yes,
them every day. And
good.
and for me, I found that my trigger seems to be mold, and it seems to be
Yes.
just living in a humid climate. It doesn't matter whose house or what building I'm in. Even when I go outside, living in a humid climate, it's
Mm,
everywhere. So,
mhm,
because it's been since I was born, it's not like something I acquired. It was just like
mm.
I'm not supposed to be here.
I hear you, my friend. Yes. And so then there's this inherited experience that you came into the world with. And so then you find what I hear you saying is you find that then when there's an environmental toxin like a mold and a mycotoxin, that's just really difficult on your body, on your system. And then you notice, oh my goodness, my histamine is going up. It's interfering with my hormones. And now that's interfering with my nervous system and then my emotions. My husband can tell. And so you're managing that by working on taking those supplements to help detox the histamine. So that you're a brilliant example of instead of just taking the Benadryl or the
Yeah.
hydroxyzine to just try to suppress your symptoms, is you're like, what can I do to make that pathway work better and where might it have come from? What are some of the root causes so that you can treat what's within your control and manage what's outside of your control? I think you're brilliant.
Yeah. I mean, it took me like 40 something years to figure that one out, but finally did.
How did you figure it out? Like what was the aha for you?
I will just tell you, scrolling on TikTok And then somebody's like, do you have this? Do you have this? It's like, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. You had that aha moment. Have you
Yeah.
had mold testing done? Like your own urine test?
Not on myself. I've found it in the walls. I've removed it. I've moved to different homes.
Mhm.
It's just the environment. I've lived in 12 different places, and it's happened in every single one of them. So I just feel like it's
Yeah,
everywhere here.
it
But when
is.
I go to like a dry climate, if I go to Arizona, I'm fine. If I go to like a mountainous climate, I'm totally fine. Like all the symptoms magically go away.
That's hugely profound. And what's really beautiful about that is that we know that anything that changes is changeable. And
Mhm.
so I really I want to say that again for your listeners is so for those who are listening, anything that changes is changeable. So that means that if you find that your allergies flare and then they recede a little bit, or if you have horrible panic attacks and there's moments when it's worse and moments when it's better, is anything that changes is changeable. And so always hold on to hope that maybe you'll learn something new, you'll listen to another great podcast, and that could be something that moves you closer to where you want to be, because just like if you fall off of a bicycle and scrape your knee, your body is incredibly capable of healing. It's just a matter of how to support that. And so you're doing that and you figured out some things that can make a big impact for you.
Yeah, and I do notice that a lot of women, they think it's, oh, I just have estrogen dominance. Oh, I just have like hypothyroid, or but I see histamine in all
Yeah.
of them.
Yeah.
And it just
Ex-
their doctors won't tell them it's that, because they don't
yeah.
have the runny nose or the dry eyes and stuff like that.
They don't know how to treat it either. They're just
Yeah.
like, well, take a Benadryl, I guess. But there's so much more. And it sounds like you're a wealth of information for your audience, that if they're like, oh my gosh, I just heard this part of Dr. Nicole's podcast and you said you had this info, I want it. You'll be like, I got you.
Yeah, I do remember that Midol always had antihistamines in it.
Yeah.
So they knew about this.
He knew about it. And benzos like Xanax and Valium and Klonopin, right? Part of how they work is they're anti-inflammatory. And so when we have histamine activation, is histamine can cause your mast cells to release all these inflammatory markers, all these inflammatory cells. And so some people, as they're tapering off of their benzo, they notice my allergies are worse, my anxiety is worse, I'm reacting, I'm getting skin rashes and hives and my stuffy nose, my postnasal drip. And so I think it's really important, kind of what you're doing is like, well, what's the common denominator here? And for so many of us, it's inflammation.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So let's talk about like how other environmental factors can come into play, like the products we're using on our skin all the time, the how we're working, how we're living in modern society, like how does that affect?
Yeah. There was a quote that I heard once, and it was, the closer you are to nature, the closer you are to health. And the farther you are from nature, the farther you are from health. And we've seen such a huge shift in the rates of chronic disease in this country, and it's going correlatively with more um, GMOs added to our food, preservatives added to our food, industrialization. We're finding that more and more chemicals are being added, and that we're seeing positive correlations with weight gain, inflammation, hormone imbalances, fertility. We're actually seeing breakdown of the X chromosome, which is wild. That so 40% of people are struggling with fertility issues. And so our country is getting less and less healthy, and we're also correspondingly getting farther and farther away from nature. And I see the major culprits for this is in the skin and what we're putting inside of our mouths and our bodies. So our skin, and we know this from traditional Chinese medicine, as they've talked about this for thousands of years, is our skin is our first barrier between us and the world. And we call it wind chi invasion. When we get an infection, it gets through that outer barrier and it gets into the body, and now the body has to fight against it. And so when we're actually actively applying products to our bodies that are promoting inflammation, that contain heavy metals, preservatives, dyes, chemicals, ingredients that we can't pronounce. We're placing that directly onto the bodies, and it can break down that layer. It can change the acid base balance of the skin. It can change the microbial balance of the body. And when all of that goes out of balance, of course, we get symptoms. And then we live in a society where now we have symptoms, we're trying to suppress those symptoms. So it's kind of like playing a game of whack-a-mole. If you've ever been to like Showbiz or Chuck E. Cheese, and those little things, you whack them with a hammer, but then it just comes up somewhere else. Is I have so many people that come to me and they're on all of these medications, treating side effects from the medications, and all of it is this big domino. So the skin barrier is really important. And so a great app for those who are like, oh my gosh, now I have to throw away everything in my cabinet, is I really like the Environmental Working Group app. It's EWG in the App Store, and it's free. You can download it. They probably have upsells in there, but you can use it for free. And it has a great scanny barcode where you can actually scan products while you're shopping, or you can look online and type products in or scan them in and find out, well, what is the research on, does this have arsenic in it? Does it have partially hydrogenated or fully hydrogenated oils in it? Or does this have red food dye in it? Like, why does Pepto-Bismol need to be pink? Like, I don't know. It seems pretty unnecessary. It doesn't need to be pretty. If you stop me from throwing up, that's fine. It doesn't have to be pretty. And so that's a really good place to start. But here's a secondary place. So one is what we're putting on our body, and one is what we're putting in our body. And I want to talk about the brain and stimuli. Would that be okay?
Sure, let's go.
Okay. So we are essentially genetically quite similar to our caveman ancestors. And when we think about the level of stimulation that the nervous systems of our great, 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 etc. ancestors, is they had the community around them, which wasn't billions of people. It was their small group around them. They had the environment that was around them. They had the illnesses that was around them. They had the data that was around them. And human beings genetically evolved very slowly. The thing that helps us be able to adapt quickly is our gut microbiome. That can change every bite of food that we take, is that those bacteria can change DNA, swap it with viruses, help us adapt and survive. But really, our core DNA is very similar. So have you ever seen, this is an old movie from the 80s, but did you ever see Encino Man, where he gets like
Yes.
cryogenically? Yeah. So this is like what's happening to all of our nervous systems, is that we were like, have caveman brains, and we just like wake up and there's TikToks, and there's the news, and there's ads, and there's flashing billboards, and there's posts, and there's email notifications, and there's all the traffic and the helicopters. There's so much stimulation. And the Encino Man was like, what the heck is this? I'm doing a gesture of a head exploding for those listening. And so in your brain, we've done neuroscience research on this. In your brain, you have a part, it's called the salience network. Salience is a word that's like, is it relevant or not? Do I care? And so this part of the brain, the salience network, is working 24/7, scanning the external environment and your internal environment. And it's trying to figure out what's relevant for you for survival or not. Remember, your brain doesn't care about your well-being, it cares about your survival. So when we flood the salience network with so much more data than the human brain has ever been able to process before, when in doubt, send it on. So the salience network is like, oh my gosh, it's a fire hose to the face of information. I don't know if it's bad or not. I don't have the speed to do this. So I'm just going to drop it down to the amygdala. The amygdala, for those who are like, ooh, what's that? Is, think Amy has big feelings. Amy, the amygdala, has big feelings. Your amygdala is your emotional processing part of the brain. The amygdala gets this dump of info from your salience network, your insular cortex, and it's like, oh shit, I can't handle all of this either. I don't know if it's dangerous. When in doubt, send it on. So then the amygdala activates your autonomic nervous system. So now your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis is now getting activated, which results in cortisol, stress hormone, getting released, right? And adrenaline getting released. And so now your blood pressure is going up. It's breaking down glycogen into glucose. So your blood sugar is going up, your heart, your lungs, you're restless. And you're sitting at your computer and you just received an email. And the email is like, oh my gosh, you screwed something up or you forgot this deadline. And your already activated state gets activated even more. And then you're sitting at work and you feel panicky. You feel irritated. You feel like my brain is going blank. I feel so stressed. Why am I having a panic attack? I can't have a panic attack at work, right? And so part of that, if we now reverse engineer our way back out of that, is what is the input coming into my brain and my body? How much time have I spent on my screens? How much time have I spent reading the news? How much time have I spent in front of the television or whatever it is? And doing an audit of input. So we talked about doing an audit of what we're putting on our bodies, doing an audit and trying to get back to more clean products, but also doing an audit of what we're consuming in terms of stimulation and information. And so that I've been talking for a lot, so I kind of want to hear how this is landing for you and what you're thinking.
Yeah, no, I feel that. Like I remember when we got hurricane windows and the thick glass, and you could not hear the traffic as much, how much less stress we felt. And you got used to it. You didn't hear it as much, but like there was something like your body's like, is this truck gonna hit me? Like, what is this noise? Or like having like a street light and then, getting really good darkening shades on, then you don't feel that at night. Or even like having a nightlight can cause stress, or the wrong kind of, like the LEDs instead of the incandescent, like just all these little things. And then you got your pop-ups, you got your alarms, and blah, blah, blah. And then starting the day with an alarm, it's a nightmare.
It is. Yeah. I live half the year in Arizona and then half the year in Michigan. And I always tell the apartment complex, like, I need like my home to be my peaceful place to like rest and recover. And then if I want to get into shenanigans and listen to music and whatever, be in the city, then I'll go out to do that. But I want my home to be quiet. And they're like, yeah, that's fine. Whatever, you high maintenance girl. And so I picked an apartment that faced a church, and the church is really quiet. And we're in the middle of Phoenix. And so then you have this street on the east side that's like a pretty big thoroughfare. So everyone with Dodge Chargers are like zooming down the street with really loud engines. And so I'm like, I want to be on the south side facing the church. So we get there, and they have demoed the church, and there's like gigantor cranes, and they all have to beep loudly when they back up. There's jackhammers. And so I kid you not, for the last 6 months, I have been in a construction zone, and there's like dirt. And then, of course, in Arizona, we have to deal with valley fever. So I'm like worried that my dog, my husband, and I, not in that order, are huffing this dirt and we're going to get valley fever. And I'm so overstimulated the entire time I was there. My sleep was terrible. I was more irritated. My digestion was off. I was having to take a lot more supplements like theanine and antihistamine support and all of that. And so we just get back to Michigan, and it's so quiet. And it's like what you're talking about. This is my hurricane windows, is like, oh my God, I hear birds. Where's the sound of the chargers and the helicopters and the beeping? Oh my God, I don't hear it. And it was like melting. It was like stress melting off of my body. And like last night, I woke up this morning and I was like, I had the best sleep of my life last night, because it's just like all that input and that stimulation was down. So I really, really encourage those who are listening is to really do an audit of what you can control in terms of stimulation. Maybe you don't have the privilege of moving and you just have to deal with the noise, but what are other things that you can do? Other little changes you can make that might have a big impact for your nervous system.
Yeah, I totally feel that. There's so many things that I've had to do because of this, because of the histamines, and realizing even a nightlight can
Mhm.
increase your it's like just the craziest thing. Nobody thinks about that.
Right.
Or like, what was the other one? Candles with the fragrance of phthalates that can, for me at least, skyrocket my histamines.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It can be so demoralizing when we start to walk around. Like I was at the grocery store the other day and I have the curse of knowledge. So I'm like, I can't have that. I can't have that. That's toxic. And I was like, ooh, these pastries. I was like really hungry that day. So I was like, of course, wanting pastries. So I was like, oh, these pastries. And then right on the label, it says made with artificial flavors. And I was like, why do you need to do that? Why is that necessary? There will be a negative consequence to my body if I eat that pastry. And so I had to say no to that. And that can be really hard as many of us feel like angry at the food in our societies. We feel angry, we feel betrayed. It's like, oh my gosh, I love this perfume by Chanel. But now I'm like realizing that it has a bunch of toxic ingredients. Sorry, Chanel. Right. And so what am I going to do? Smell like patchouli? And there's good solutions for everything thanks to amazing, intelligent innovators who are creating great high integrity products. But in the beginning, it can feel like, wow, now I don't get that candle. I don't get that cute nightlight. But there are good trade-offs. There are really exciting trade-offs.
Yeah, I've found myself making everything from scratch because I found a trigger for me
Oh,
is citric acid. Good luck finding something without citric acid in it. So I
yeah.
make my own lotions, I make my own soap, I
Ah,
make ice cream from scratch because the gums I don't trust, like everything. It's like, and everybody's like, "Oh, that's stressful, Kat. Why are you doing all this work? That's stress, and that's gonna raise your histamines because you're stressed." And I'm like, I don't know. We're
yeah.
kind of in a situation here.
Yeah, you're managing it. You're educated, you're figuring it out and doing I like the idea of doing an elimination and then a reintroduction. Is that maybe it's citric acid paired with parabens. And so once you like get all of that out, if you then try to light a candle that doesn't have citric acid or anything weird in it, it's just like a soy candle, then maybe in the future that would be okay for you. But right now it sounds like you're in this like cleaning out phase. And so for those that are listening and they're like, I don't even know where to start, is maybe just think of it as like a 1 month detox and pick where you're going to start. Like I'm going to detox from cosmetics that are unhealthy brands and I'm going to detox from fast food or I'm going to detox from I have so many people right now and they're hooked on diet coke. Like if you can do one thing, just take out detox yourself of the diet coke, please. Right? Is like figure out what you can remove, give your body a month, let that inflammation come down and then add it back in. And then if you're fine when you add it back in, okay, maybe that wasn't it. But if you get symptoms, then you're empowered with knowledge about what your body in particular can't do. And it sounds like you did that, Kat, with the citric acid and the other ingredients.
Yeah, 2020, I didn't put anything in my body and then I introduced one at a time. I let it stay for like a month to see because sometimes when you first add something in, it takes a
Hmm.
while to get the symptoms. And if
Yep.
you start adding more stuff, you'll never know.
What has the net benefit been for you? So for those that are listening and they're
Yeah.
like, oh, why bother? If I could just take a Benadryl and call it a day, why bother?
I lost my rosacea. I was getting hives after eating certain foods. I was, like I don't there's so many things. I think histamines can
Mm.
even make you lose your hair if you have too much. There's so many symptoms. Plus the
Yeah.
swelling. I would get swelling over here so my neck would
Mm.
be my jawline would be disappeared,
Hmm.
bloating, the whole thing. It's
Yeah.
just it's a mess. So, if you know,
Yeah. It changed your life.
yeah, definitely. Oh, can we talk about heavy metals and anxiety? Because I remember hearing that the boomers had a lot of lead, and that's why they're all angry. I don't know if that's true, but now I'm seeing we're having so much lead introduced into like ever since we started getting stuff made overseas, and there's like lax regulations, if any. Now we have lead everywhere. I'm seeing it like in cups, just in like Marshalls and TJ Maxx and regular stores. We got lead everywhere again. And then the salt has like arsenic and lead and whatever. So, what can heavy metals be doing to us that cause anxiety?
Yes. And so heavy metals are a real problem. And part of how they work is that they look quite similar in your body's mind to minerals. So it's hormone production pathways use minerals like magnesium and selenium and potassium, like all these different things, zinc, all this stuff. And when you have a bunch of metals in your system, the body will grab that metal first and put it in the pathway, and it's not going to work. So here's a link between metals and hormone issues, is that so many of us women, we feel like I have horrible PMDD. I have horrible PMS. I get terrible hormonal acne. My periods are wretched, or I've struggled with fertility, or oh my God, perimenopause has been a hot mess, right? And then you go and you finally convince your doctor to actually check your hormones, and then your hormones are normal. And you're like, but literally, my lived experience is that my hormones are not okay. I'm not okay. And you're telling me that these blood tests are normal. And then we feel gaslit, right? We feel like we're crazy. It's not our hormones. Can't be our hormones because this here. So then people walk away and they feel like they hit a dead end. They feel demoralized. They feel completely powerless. But here's the thing. Many, many, many of these women, I see this day after day in my practice, their hormones aren't working correctly because those pathways are jammed with heavy metal toxicity. So the way that we identify that is that we do heavy metal toxicity testing, and then we look at the pathways of how we break down estrogen. And there's a test, I have no affiliation. It's called a Dutch test, DUTCH. It's dutchtest.com, I think, or dutch.com. And Google that. Don't just type the URL, and I have no idea what you're going to get. And so then we can look at, your doctor will just run estradiol, estrogen, for example. But here's the thing, not all estrogens are created equal. And so if you have a toxic burden, that's going to affect how you break down and use your estrogen. So for example, think about two classrooms. Let's say there are two kindergarten classrooms. In classroom number 1, the kindergartners have all been given gobs of sugar and Diet Coke, and there's screens and Nerf guns you can imagine in your head, right? And then in kindergarten classroom number 2, they're playing a little bit of classical music. The lights are on low. They're laying on yoga mats. They all get a stuffy and maybe even like a warm, yummy tea, like a chamomile tea or a hawthorn tea, just some yummy fruit tea, right? So if we look at those, they have the same number of kindergartners. It's the same building, but your lived experience is completely different. And so that's the same with estrogen. So your estradiol can be broken down into E1, E2, E3, and then your estrogen can be further broken down into 2-OH, 16-OH, and 4-OH. And 16-OH and 4-OH are estrogens that cause estrogen dominant symptoms. They cause DNA damage, cause inflammation, causes mood swings, that causes all sorts of problems with fertility. And if you just stop at just basic estrogen testing, you're going to have no idea that you can actually treat this. And so when you combine that with environmental therapies and treatments, and you start working on the detox and you start working on the gut microbiome, then suddenly your hormones are getting better. Your doctor is like, your numbers are still the same, but your actual metabolites change and your environmental toxins change and your symptoms change. So heavy metals are huge. And that was one offshoot of how they can affect you, but they could also affect your brain. And so, like you said, people who have high amounts of lead, oftentimes we see they're constipated, they're angry, and they're anxious. Mercury, we think of Mad Hatter disease. So I think about Alice in Wonderland. We have mercury poisoning, and then it's coming in from unregulated supplement companies. So for those who are wanting to buy supplements, I really urge you to not buy supplements off of major online retailers, because there is no FDA oversight. Anyone can create an Amazon account, they can upload anything, and they can label it whatever they want, and there's no regulation. So you don't know that you get what you think you're getting. And then I think about this especially with Chinese supplements and tea pills, is some of them have a lot of lead in it. So if you want to take supplements, and that's a part of your health goals, is make sure you're not taking loads and loads of things that are going to then make you sick And that also goes for fish oil. Is many people, they get their fish oil. I went to Costco and I smelled the fish oil someone had bought. The patient brought it in and it was rancid. They had no idea, but rancid oils can cause symptoms. And so get it from a reputable retailer, a pharmaceutical grade or a physician grade. Go to your holistic doctor or maybe a healthcare store, depending on um, the quality. Like Whole Foods, unfortunately, is owned by Amazon. And so I've seen a lot of changes in what they carry and the level of quality of what they're carrying. But your doctors, many of us have access to things like Full Script or Welevate. And so that's a better place to go. So you're not just adding more heavy metals and problems.
Yeah, that's so true. How much time do I have? Because we're almost.
I have a little bit more time.
Okay, cool. All right. So, give us some tips on how we can lower our anxiety. Let's go through that now.
Yeah, there's a 4-step process that I like to teach for lowering our anxiety. And it's lowering the anxiety by reprogramming the anxiety producing patterns. Because remember, anxiety is our body is misinterpreting data in the present as something that's dangerous. So the antidote to anxiety is personal power. And personal power comes from knowing why we have anxiety and exactly what to do with it. So we can reprogram, because remember, anything that changes is changeable. You may have inherited specific programming, but we can reprogram this neuroplasticity. We can change the gut microbiome. We can work with the immune system. We can start to regulate the obstacles that are interfering with our hormones. We can change our environment. We can reprogram our body to be poised for feeling calm and control when it can be. And then if something truly dangerous happens, we can feel fear. So it's all about being in our natural state. So the 4 steps. So step number 1 is when we get activated, we have changes in the teams in our brains. So we have, I think of it as your default mode network, which is autopilot, dissociation, self-rumination, zoning out. This is when you drive somewhere. It's probably never happened to you, but sometimes I'll like drive to work and I've driven the drive 100 times and I get there and I'm like, nope, don't remember that drive, but I know I did it. Right? That's your default team. It's like your car's on cruise control and it just goes. And then you have the executive team, and that's analytical. That's like cat breaking things down and analyzing it. This executive team is able to rationalize whether or not you're safe, right? So with anxiety, when that whole Amy, the amygdala, gets activated and makes us anxious, your brain will automatically push the dissociative default autopilot mode because you don't want to analyze the tiger when you're running from it. Your executive team, the prefrontal cortex, your logical part of your brain, is bypassed when we're in a fight, flight, freeze, flop, fawn, fracture state. So the very first step in that 4-step process when we're getting activated is to return to the body. And so this is using touch. Like, what are 3 things you can touch? So right now I have a scrunchie I can touch. I can touch my mug. I can even place my hands on my body and feel my skin, feel my grounded self. You could go outside, touch the grass, touch your animal, hug your loved one, touch. The second thing that gets us back in our body is temperature. And in dialectical behavioral therapy, Marshall Linehan used to teach about sticking your face in a bucket of ice water. Temperature, especially cold around the eyes, calms the nervous system. It activates what's called the mammalian dive reflex. So it slows down our heart, lowers our blood pressure to calm anxiety. But let's be real. Your makeup is on point today, sister. So you probably don't want to put your face in a bucket of ice water. That sounds terrible.
In the freezer?
You can stick it in the freezer. You can get frozen peas if you're at home and you have something. My favorite is for those who are on the go is go online and order those first aid kits. And so there's a cold pack, and if you shake it up, it has a chemical reaction and it gets cold.
Mhm.
And so it's like the size of your wallet or your phone, and you can place that over your eyes. 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, the chest, the back of the neck. Cold is really good. If you can, take a sauna, jump in a cold pool, hot or cold shower. Temperature is awesome. The other thing that brings us back into our body is taste. Your vagus nerve, we were talking about that earlier with the gut brain axis and how the vagus nerve is our light switch into calm. You can use the breath to activate the vagus nerve. And kids know how to do this automatically. So I don't know if you've ever had this happen in your house where your kiddo gets mad and they just go, right? So they're exhaling, they're sighing really big. It's the physiologic sigh. And so the first thing I notice when I'm getting really activated and really stressed is just sigh extra, extra long. For people who it's like they've in that scenario where it's like all the lights and the noise and the stimuli and the email comes in, is you might try doing a square breath where you inhale for 4, you hold your breath for 4, you exhale for as long as you can, and then you hold for 4, and you repeat that a few times. That stimulates vagus nerve, calms the body. And so there are a few other things that you can do that are in the book. It's in the tips section. Those are tips for step 1. Step 2 is now we want to reprogram the brain so that when we go into that kind of autopilot mode, that you have roads and bridges and synaptic connections to this executive logical brain mode, because the way you wire it is the way you'll fire it. So if you're used to, and this is the woman with OCD I was talking to earlier today, is if you don't stop giving into the compulsions, and if you just stay in the compulsion all the time, it's just going to get more and more solidified. You have to practice using your skills because you're rewiring and adding that. So in phase 2, we are practicing rewiring to the prefrontal cortex. And so there's this technique, it's called amygdala de-amplification. And so really quickly, a TLDR on that is that you practice every day and you can set your alarm for like 10 minutes and you notice something in step 1. You notice something that feels kind of yucky or kind of stressful, and you notice it for about 10 seconds. And then after that, for another maybe 20 or 30 seconds, is you start doing mental math. You count backwards from 40, you do your ABCs, you do multiplication tables, you imagine going into Sephora and buying stuff, although now we've talked about environmental toxicity, so maybe not Sephora, right? But then you alternate doing that. Like I go into the stressful, yucky thing, and then I do mental math. And I go into the stressful, yucky thing, and you practice doing that back and forth for 10 minutes, and you'll notice that that stressful, yucky thing becomes less and less and less activated. So you do that, that's step 2. Step 3 is now we want to bridge the gap between the mind and the body, because oftentimes with stress, anxiety, panic, and anger is that we don't notice the whispers. We notice when they shout. We don't notice that we're in that kind of pay attention zone between green and gold. We notice when it's like going into red. So in practicing interoception, bridging the gap between the mind body will help us be more attuned to the messages of our body so that we can make changes. And you're very adept at that. You know, like, oh, my body's talking to me. I'm not going to wait for it to scream. I'm going to make changes now. A practical way to do that is while you're brushing your teeth every morning and night, is just notice, what do I feel in my feet? I'm not trying to change it. I'm not trying to do anything about it. I'm just noticing. I'm practicing noticing my feet. And then you just mindfully work your way up your body. And the key here is you don't change it. You don't react to it. You notice your shoulders are shrugging and you don't try to relax them. You just notice them, because in this step, we're just practicing bridging that gap without trying to fix it. And then here's the last step. And this is a really good take home, is that I talked to an anxiety influencer. She interviewed me not too long ago. And she was like, Dr. Cain, I'm always in the green light zone. I never get anxious anymore. I never go into the yellow and the red zone. And I said, I would argue that that's actually kind of a problem, is that we need to be able to get activated. Being activated is how we grow. If we're not getting activated, we're not widening our window of tolerance. And so step 4 is all about intentionally activating ourselves. And so this will help us practice learning how to go into activation and arousal and bringing ourselves out of it. Because if you can practice going into activation and bringing yourself out of it 100 times, is that when life happens and arousal happens, that you know exactly what to do and you're no longer afraid, because the antidote to anxiety is personal power, right? So here's a couple of ways to do that. So someone is more of a pitta personality in Ayurveda. If they're more spicy, if they're more hot, they're more agitated, cold plunges can be awesome for this. You put yourself in cold, and then you calm the body and you tell yourself, I'm going to sit in here for 40 seconds. We feel the yucky feelings. Your body doesn't like it. You know what it's like. You're experiencing the yucky feelings. And then after 40 seconds, you can say, I'm going to do 40 more seconds. I'm choosing. Or now I'm going to get out. So you bring yourself into arousal and then you rescue yourself. High intensity interval training is another example. You run or do burpees or do something really, really activating. Your heart rate goes up and you breathe and your heart rate goes down. A last example I'll give is doing a high ropes course, because that can be actually you lean over and you look down, you're like, oh, that's scary, that's really high, I'm really nervous, but it's objectively safe. You're clipped in, it's safe, it's in your control. And so then you tell yourself, I'm going to stand up here, or I'm going to do this course for this amount of time, and then I'm going to rescue myself. So that every single time you practiced getting in my body, I know how to get in my body. I know how to activate my dream team, logical executive team. I know how to notice my body and be aware of it. And now I know how to activate and relax it. That is the way to reprogram yourself so that you are panic proof.
That sounds great. Can you give me an example for when I'm in the car and somebody cuts me off? Because for me, I feel great after I curse a little bit. Is that
Yeah.
bad?
No, release it, curse, say
Okay.
all the things.
Okay.
What you suppress will express itself. It's just going to
Okay.
find other ways. And here's the thing I'm always telling people is all vibes are welcome. I am on a rampage against good vibes only culture. And so all of the feelings that you have are totally natural. And so someone cuts you off and you get a flush of very valid feeling because they just put your life in danger. So your body is releasing all of this fight, flight, freeze. And so releasing that is so powerful in the moment.
Okay, great. Because I feel wonderful after, and everybody's like, you need to control yourself.
No, don't control yourself. You're controlling by choosing how you're going to respond. So like getting out a Glock and shooting them is obviously like not the right
See, I'm
answer.
doing way better than that.
You're yeah, say all the things. And like I love telling people to shower cry or scream in the car. I actually, when I was going through EMDR therapy, I grew up in a very Dutch family and we like don't say anything. We suppress everything. And how dare you express your feelings? And my therapist is like, I want you to get in the car and I want you to scream cry. And I was like, I can't make myself cry. She's like, I want you to just go through the motions and like scream as though you're keening. Like if I was an actor on stage and I'm screaming. And by activating that from my place of power and control, it activates all these memory networks, all this stored stuff. And now I'm creating doorways to release. And so it could be really powerful. And a last story, because I know we're coming at the end of our time, is I had this woman who came to see me. She flew all the way from Tennessee to Arizona, and she had Lyme disease. And her symptoms were really debilitating. So she was going to this clinic here in Scottsdale, Arizona, and she was getting IVs and really intensive treatment and therapies. And I was doing the mental health, the emotional support part of it. And she was there for a couple of weeks and she's getting like decent results. And so then at one point she's like, Dr. Nicole, I just like feel like screaming. Like I'm so effing mad at my ex. And I was like, all right, girl, I want you to go into the desert. I want you to kick a bunch of rocks and I want you to scream. Within 3 days, her symptoms were 90% better. Within a week, she was able to close out her treatment at this clinic and she went back to Tennessee. She continued screaming and releasing, and then she got better. It was absolutely amazing. She'd been doing everything right, but she hadn't opened that that emunctory, if you will, that channel to scream. So yes, please scream.
Yes. All right.
Yeah. Dr. Nicole says I could scream, honey. So here it is.
All right. Awesome. So, tell everyone how they can work with you. Tell us about your freebie.
Yes, I wrote a book. It's called Panic Proof. There's a secret URL in the book, and that will take you to a part of my website that has actual clickable links for everything that I refer to in the book. All my tinctures are in there, the tests are in there, the labs are in there, the recipes are in there. All of that's there for you you can find it in the book. You don't have to buy the book. It's in the library too. So for those of you where it's cost prohibitive, I could send you a copy. But also you could get it at the library, but buy the book. And if you want to leave words of encouragement, I would be ever so grateful. And I also have a free quiz. It's the 9 types of anxiety quiz. And you can find that at my website, drnicolecain.com. And that will help you get started on this whole thing. You listen to this whole conversation and you're like, I want to get started, but where do I start? A great place is to start at the free quiz and getting the book. And then it will walk you through. When you finish the book, you will have made your own panic proof plan that's literally customized of what habits do I do? What food do I eat? What supplements should I take? What tests should I do? You will have all of that. And then, of course, come hang out with me on Instagram. Kat and I hang on Instagram, and it's awesome. And I'm Dr. Nicole Cain.
Awesome. So I will put all of that in the show notes so everyone can go and check you out. And please buy the book. It is amazing. And is there anything else you'd like to leave the listeners with before we go?
Just remember, you can always hear anxiety is not the problem. Anxiety is your body and your mind's solutions to a deeper imbalance. And so by being your own Sherlock Holmes, you can really, truly be panic proof.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. And we'll see you all next time.
Thank you.
Start the revolution, let the truth begin. Wake up, defeating lies. Control the media's got you hypnotized. Trust authority, they'll take your soul. Break the chains, find your own control.